Hi guys, this is the second half of the lecture for lecture number 3. We're going to get into the PowerPoint now. Okay, so just as a very fast review, once I pull it up, there we go. Let's maximize it. Last time we were together, we started to talk about the rights of workers. So the 3 that we went over was this concept of a right to a just or living wage. Basically, the Catholic Church feels that those who work full time should make enough to at least provide for food, shelter, and education of their families so that their families could live with dignity. And we emphasize this concept that the minimum wage is in most cases not the same thing as a livable wage. We saw the second right was a right to rest. This actually is biblical in roots. It comes from the Sabbath rest that we see in the book of Genesis. So meaning the story of creation where God himself takes the 7th day to rest. And we really looked at the fact that the right to rest is an important time for families to strengthen bonds, to stimulate the mind, and most importantly, a time that is supposed to be dedicated to worship of the Lord. And finally, where we left off last time and where we're picking up today is this concept of a right to a safe workplace, that the government has a responsibility to prevent and punish violations for companies who don't provide safe working conditions. So without further ado, today we're going to begin by talking about the Triangle Shirtwaist Company factory fire. Some of you might have heard of this already, from possibly some of your social studies or history courses. But this is going to be, we're going to watch a very short 2.5 minute video that is going to cover that fire. So let us watch that now.
Waste factory fire was a man-made disaster, a tragedy of the industrial age, made all the worse because it could have been prevented. Let me set the scene. New York City, early 20th century. The Triangle Shirtwaist Factory occupied several floors of a Manhattan business building called the Ash Building. It was located just off Washington Square Park, one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in the city. The Triangle Shirtwaist Factory was, by almost any definition, a sweatshop. It was a densely packed place. Some 500 people worked there, and the work schedule was punishing. 11 to 12 hours a day, every day. Most of the people employed at the factory were young immigrant women, teenagers even, who didn't speak English. These women sat at long tables, day in, day out, sewing shirtwaists. Shirtwaists were mass-produced blouses. They resembled men's shirts and were very popular with working women. So here's what happened. March 25th, 1911, Saturday evening, the end of the workday, the work week. A fire started in a bin of cotton scraps, perhaps from a cigarette butt. A manager tried to use a hose to put it out, but the hose valve was rusted shut, and the hose itself was rotted away. The factory floor didn't have a sprinkler system, so the fire spread quickly. People panicked. The building had only one flimsy fire escape, and it wasn't nearly big enough. It collapsed. The building had 4 elevators, but only one was working, and it only held 12 people at a time. It managed to make 4 rescue trips before it broke down. Some desperate workers jumped to their deaths down the elevator shaft. Workers tried to take the stairs, but the exit doors only opened inward, and they were kept locked by factory management. Many people were crushed to death trying to get out. Firefighting technology hadn't caught up to the new tall buildings of a city like New York. The fire hoses and ladders could only reach the 7th floor, 1 floor short of the fire. Dozens of desperate workers jumped out of the windows. They chose to die from the fall instead of the flames. Other workers burned to death or died from smoke inhalation. The whole episode lasted just 18 minutes. 144 people were dead. 2 more died later in the hospital, bringing the death toll to 146. Until the events of September 11th, it was the deadliest workplace disaster in New York City history. Days later, on April 5th, a massive funeral protest march took place on 5th Avenue in Manhattan. More than 350,000 people were in attendance. The factory owners, Max Blanc and Isaac Harris, were indicted for manslaughter, but were declared not guilty in their trial later that year. Yet, long after the flames died out, the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire served as a cautionary tale that helped to redefine the American industrial workplace. The fire was a key moment in the growth of labor unions, particularly the ILGWU, or International Ladies Garment Workers Union. New York City passed measures including the Sullivan-Hoey Fire Prevention Law, which required sprinkler systems to be installed in all factories. It served as a model for state and national workplace safety codes. These measures made American workers safer, but they were too late for the workers who perished one terrible March day at the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory.
Okay.
Getting elected president is
We will stop there. So as you could see, it's crucial to have safety within the working environment. And OSHA is the federal government that is now basically accountable for keeping people safe. So we're going to move forward. The fourth basic right that CST says a worker should have is the right to maintain their own moral principles, meaning no worker should be forced to perform an action that violates their conscience or their religious belief. So for example, if you're Catholic and you're a nurse or a doctor, you shouldn't be forced to have to perform a abortion, because that would go against your belief system. If you work in an office and a boss tells you to do something like to get rid of documents, which is essentially in this particular case would be illegal. If he's having you destroy, he or she's asking you to destroy possible evidence, you can't be forced into committing a sin. So that would be a right, and you shouldn't be forced to either do it or lose your job. So that's the right to be allowed to maintain your moral principles. Number 5, the right to unemployment aid. So the Catholic Church feels that companies through states and federal government have an obligation to provide aid for those who are unwillingly unemployed. So we're not talking about individuals who just want to slack off and get some benefits. And again, we believe as a church, most people don't fit into that category. But we believe for those who truly want to work and have done their best to work, and by no fault of their own are not working, that they should be allowed to have some type of unemployment benefit. The 6th right is the right to pensions and insurance. So the Catholic Church teaches that healthcare is a basic human right. It's based on our sanctity of our life and our human dignity. We have the right to keep our God-given selves healthy. How that's implemented, the specifics of that, the church doesn't get involved with. But the church says that someone basically says we have to, as a society, come up with a solution so that everyone has access to health care as a basic human right. They'll say that companies have an obligation to help provide for medical insurance to cover illness or extended work-related injuries. Smaller companies really are challenged with that. So we really have to get creative as a society and figure out what needs to be done. I think all that's going on right now with the coronavirus, unfortunately, many people are already battling unemployment and many more will be laid off. So the Catholic Church is saying that not only our companies, but our government has an obligation to help put safety nets in place to carry families through this really challenging time. Okay, the last 3 basic workers' rights, and here's where we're going to stop for today, is number 7, maternity in the workplace. So at the core of the Catholic Church is the family. And at the core of the family is a husband and a wife who are called to bring forth children in the world. And the Catholic Church says that the right to motherhood or parenthood should never hinder or block the workplace. So women should have adequate compensation and job security after giving birth. And also fathers as well should have the opportunity to take time out to be there with their families. So maternity leave and family medical leave are strongly supported by the Catholic Church as a way to protect and keep the family unified. 8, the right to assemble and form associations. You saw that one of the positive outcomes of the horrible Triangle Waste factory fire was that unions were formed. And this is a basic right. The basic right to form a union is a right that the Catholic Church says every worker should have. Basically, a union is an association of workers that turn up and try to stand up for their rights, to protect their dignity. Now, unions, that doesn't mean a union has, when it comes down to the last right, which is number 9, the right to strike. So be careful. Sometimes gentlemen put these two together. It's a separate right. Individuals do have the right to strike, which is a temporary work stoppage by employees in order to try to either secure higher pay or better working conditions. However, the church puts some rights around the right to strike, which means the strike has to really meet proper criteria and proper conditions, and it has to be done in a morally acceptable way. It can never be done with violence, and it can never be done just for the sole purpose of a political agenda. It has to be done because, as a last resort, because the working conditions or the pay are just violating the dignity of the human person. Then at that point, the church would support a strike, and a strike is never acceptable when the community becomes endangered. So, gentlemen, those are the 9 basic rights of workers that CST looks for. There is an assignment called classwork number 3 that is just going to basically, it's about 5 questions. It just asks bits of a check-in to make sure you really got the content of the lesson. It's due tonight, Friday, March 20th, before 11:59 to Google Classroom. I will take it late as long as you get it in before Monday, but then you will be marked late for class, and I won't take it past Monday, which means then you'll lose the opportunity to pick up those 10 points and you will be marked absent. So please just get it done. Have a fantastic weekend. Keep moving forward with your reading. Next week, there'll be a lecture posted on Monday, and then on Tuesday or Wednesday, I'll probably more than likely give that take-home exam, which will be due on Friday. And that actually will close us out for, at least for grading purposes, for the 3rd quarter for Theology 4. Be safe and be well, and God bless you and your families.